What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Pavali coming at you with a returning guest this time. He's now a recurring guest, so this is partially his fault. If he comes back a third time, it's officially his fault for hopping back on. I'm joined by S. Barahini. Follow him on Twitter at just S. Barahini. That's at JUSTESBARAHENI. The link to that will be in the podcast YouTube description. He is an NBA coverage extraordinaire. He writes about the NBA for Forbes, where he also does Raptors covers there as well. We've seen him on Raptors Republic. You've seen his video stuff on Bleacher Report. He does these great, and he's done these, especially, he killed it during the playoffs, especially the video essays. Go check all that out on Twitter. Again, follow him at just S. Barahini. S, thank you so much for coming back. How are you doing?
Appreciate you, dude. Yeah, you know what? I think you've got a good formula here because right after I did my first appearance on the show, subscribed and just started listening. So you're getting a diehard fan base here by getting people on the show.
I love all our listeners and our audience, and they're just the people who want. But when I hear that someone who's in the industry will actively listen, even if it's once a year, to what we have to spew on here, it's very much appreciated. So thank you. And thank you for coming back. I also have to, I always try to give notice where it's like, I try to schedule guests like for the following weeks because I want to give them time and I don't want to throw them out. This is the second time in a row where you're like, what if we just go tomorrow? And so I was like, I always appreciate that too.
I got you, man.
Hop on a podcast. So thank you for just being ultra available and ready to talk.
Dude, always. And the one thing about this pod that is different than the other pods, it feels like you guys find unique angles to approach whatever that's happening in the league. So it's like, hey, we're going to talk about it through this lens. You know, we're going to rank these young cores or whatever, but through this, it's interesting. It's a different take than what you hear on whatever different podcasts that you listen to NBA wise. I know if you're listening to this right now, you already probably listened to this podcast and are dedicated to it. So you don't need to hear me sell it, but
we got the S. Barahini following shop.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So tap in, folks. Tap in.
So I brought you on to do a vibe check, confidence meter check on the NBA's rebuilds. And I'm going to start with the Toronto Raptors, who I'm just going to have the most questions about because it's you. So it's one of the teams that I've said this before, I'm just always higher on than consensus, and that has not worked out so well for me since 2019, unfortunately. But I wanted to start with, overall, with their offseason, what do you think this has telegraphed, everything they've done? What do you think this is telegraphed about how they're going to handle the next phase that this franchise is entering?
I think the obvious stuff is they're building around Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett. You know, they've brought in these younger guys and Grady Dick. They drafted Jacoby Walter. They're just going very young. But I think, you know, from listening to Bobby Webster and Masai Ujiri over the last couple of weeks, I think that the approach that they're having is we're going to try to inject this team with as much youth as possible. And whichever guy sticks, that's the guy we're building around. Obviously, they think that Scotty is one of those people. They think that IQ is one of those guys, and they hope that RJ had an incredible second half of the year. If he can continue to build on that, then that's like, hey, well worth the money that he's being given, the $30 million contract, all that type of stuff. I think they're just in wait and see, like R&D type mode. You know what I mean? Just see what's out there, right? It really is research and development. Like they just don't know what they have yet. I think they have an idea of the types of players they want to build around with Scotty and IQ, but they don't have a surefire formula. And I think that's what they're going to look for in the next couple of seasons.
And that's how I kind of took it too. And that the money they paid these guys, I mean, the Scotty Barnes deal, just you max him out. He would have been my most improved player pick had he played in enough games. I think the Emmanuel Quickley, you look at Scotty Barnes and say, okay, that's their central tentpole cornerstone, whatever. Emmanuel Quickley was more fascinating because they certainly paid him like one, even with the cap going up. I think we both just assumed the Scotty Barnes deal was going to be exactly what it was. When the Emmanuel Quickley deal came through, 5 for $175, did that surprise you at all? Was that in line with what you were thinking? What was just sort of your reaction to that?
I was surprised. I was thinking more in line with Devin Vassell money, which is, I think, $30 million, but now he's at 35. You could kind of account for inflation or whatever when it comes to that. But the one wrinkle that actually I saw recently, which was interesting, is that it isn't the full $175 million 5-year deal. $2.5 million of it is unlikely incentives. So every single year, instead of $35 million, it's $32.5 million. So it's like 5 years, 162, which sounds a little bit better than 5 years, 175.
Whenever you can throw a decimal in there, that's
Yeah,
where
exactly. It's like, oh, okay, all right, but I guess that's like from my perspective, he is going to be making 25% of the cap next year. Every single year, if the cap goes up the way it's supposed to, it's going to go down. And if you're hoping he becomes a good starting point guard in 2 seasons, maybe next season, hopefully, I think that's a good amount of money for a good starting point guard. Will he get there? Is that the type of guy that he eventually will be? I think there's some legit question marks about that. Like I don't think he showed off the playmaking chops that people expected him to in Toronto. I think he showed off that he was an excellent off-ball player, could work well next to Scotty. The pick and roll tandem with those two needs to get better, and like they have to develop that chemistry. But being a lead ball handler, there's still some ways he has to grow in that department for that dollar amount to make sense. But otherwise, I think it's a good deal overall.
I liked the bet, and I actually did not know about the guarantees until you just said that. I must have missed that somewhere. So
Yeah, it literally happened yesterday. So it's yeah.
I definitely missed it then. So I had said with Grant that anything over 30 would have made me a little bit hesitant. And then when it came through, and this is when I thought it was 35 a year, I was just like, you know what? It's fine. You mentioned Devin Vassell. Like those deals are a great analog because I think you bet on the player who won. Emmanuel Quickly is already a better defender than Devin Vassell. He's smaller, but he's a better defender. But you bet on the live dribble playmaking, which you said still has to grow. But the fact that I think when you look at his kind of stop on a dime floater and the stuff he can do in the lane, like you can envision a scenario in which he is your maybe even if you're not your primary playmaker, if you're always going to defer to Scotty, like he's a starting point guard who can actually organize your offense. And so I think I'm ultimately okay with the investment they're making on him, also in part because of what you mentioned before, like just the ability to play. Like he's for someone who could be a floor general, he's also extremely plug and play because he doesn't have to be a floor general.
Yeah, absolutely. That aspect kind of reminds me of Fred VanVleet, obviously. Like that, the ability to play off ball, the catch and shoot stuff that he does, all of the little intangible things that he does on the defensive end as a team defender. A lot of it reminds me of Fred. Now he needs to get better at the playmaking side. And even Fred, when he was here initially, needed to grow a lot on the playmaking side. He's gotten better in Houston. I think there is a way for that to work systemically. And also, I think in Darko's system, with the way that they run like dribble handoffs and like the post hub stuff with Scotty and Jakob, there's a way that he can maximize his scoring ability off the ball, just off of catch and shoot shots. So I like the IQ fit. I'm curious to see how it'll look in a couple years because I think he will get way better than what he is right now. Well, I don't know. We'll see on that front though.
I'm excited to see more of just we need to figure out who that fifth guy is for them, but like the Jakob, Quickly, Barrett, and Scotty minutes. I think we only got like 500 possessions of those last year. And they were statistically really good, but they shot incredibly well from three. Will that hold up during those stretches? And then their defense was really good, specifically the rim protection. Does that hold up with that, with that lineup? But going through sort of a bunch of their, well, either holdovers or could be core players, we've kind of already tackled Quickly, but I want to ask you, like, what's the one thing about their game you'll be watching most closely? And so to reiterate with Quickly, is it sort of the live dribble playmaking? Is that what you're monitoring for him?
For sure. Yeah. It's the live dribble playmaking. It's also finishing in and around the basket, just improving his craft around that area. He's great in the floater range, like you mentioned, but sometimes gets pushed off his spot too easily. He was working on drawing fouls towards the end of the year, and I asked him about that. And I think that's an interesting wrinkle to this whole thing. It's like, hey, if you can't get to the rim, you might as well be really good at drawing fouls. And so if he works on that side, then just opening up your offensive repertoire to just improve some of the different things that you can do on the floor. He's a great shooter, great pull-up shooter. The pick and roll stuff, just because he's a shooter, opens up so much for him. But can he work on the secondary playmaking, the extra passing, all that type of stuff that he needs to work on?
What about Scotty Barnes? What do we need to like? He just improved in so many areas last year. What are we watching from him now?
Just more of everything. I know it sounds simplistic, but like just make everything look better and more refined. I think the middle creation, like mid-range shot creation stuff will be important. I know they want to lean into him more as a post-up player, like leveraging his strength and his size inside. And he's such a great playmaker already that if he can leverage that well, then hey, it's double teams, crash, you create a bunch of open shots. I think that's probably the main area. The other thing is he has this huge defensive potential where he shows off in certain games and certain stretches, especially at the start of last year. It was like, oh, this guy's going to become an all defensive level player. Maybe this year. It petered off though. It teetered off. Anyways, it wasn't as good towards the end of the season, and that effort wasn't necessarily there. So if he can find a way to sustain that defensive effort through 82 games and still work on the offensive side of things, I think that's the big thing with Scotty. It's just becoming more well-rounded.
I feel like I buy him as becoming a really good defender after what we saw last year. I thought I'm assuming this was Darko's did a better job of like having him defend more. Like there was more positional coherence to what he was doing defensively in the assignments that he was tackling. Yeah. And so the fact that they laid that groundwork, and now it's a full year with Emmanuel Quickly, who's just, he's a gritty defender. If you don't want to call him an excellent defender, that's fine. And maybe you still need to flesh out pieces around. Like RJ Barrett is at least big and has size for his position. So I think I buy into the Scotty Barnes. Like if it's not a defensive leap, the continued defensive progression from him, I think is something I buy.
You look at the rest of the roster and they are actively trying to hide one specific area of Scotty Barnes' skill by the rest of the guys on the floor. Davion Mitchell, great point of attack defender. Jacoby Walter, hopefully eventually a good point of attack defender. Jamal Shedd, rookie out of Houston, also apparently a very, very good point of attack defender, maybe the best in the class. And so
yeah, there was some like, and I mean this in a good way, there was some filthy stuff said about
insane. Yeah. Go look up the highlights if you guys want. There's some insane stuff for a guy who's like 5'11" without his shoes. The way he's able to get up and block shots is unreal. But I think the main hole they have on the defensive end is at the point of attack. They were bleeding points on the perimeter, and Scotty isn't that. Like without OG Anunoby, they asked him to be that main guy to guard the opposing team's best player. And he was it was too much for him. He couldn't handle that aspect of it, especially against quicker guys. So I think, like you said, positionally putting him in spots that can succeed is a huge part of moving what they want to do with Scotty moving forward. And then, hey, if you can find some point of attack defenders, some perimeter players that can kind of shore up the other side, then you're looking at a good defensive team eventually.
So what about RJ? My game didn't change, but it kind of did after I came to Toronto and I'm flying Barrett.
Yeah. It's weird, man. I just want to see if he can do that for 82 games. I'm sure you've seen it where he's had like 20 really good games of basketball, and he had 29 in Toronto where it was just like, man, this is an incredible player. He's playing up to the value of the $30 million that he got paid. Like this makes sense, right? He was more effective as a catch and shoot player. He was incredible in transition. He was barreling his way to the basket and finishing on over 65% of his shots on the inside, a career high. Like it was nuts.
It was bonkers. Yes.
Yeah. So I just can we see that for a whole year is my main question with RJ. It feels like it's too good to be true. And I'm saying that as a guy who was down on the trade initially. From RJ's perspective, I was excited for Quickly, but I was like, okay, we'll see what happens with RJ. Now I'm like, I need this to happen for 82 games.
That is going to be, maybe you and I need to do a podcast like next offseason to see like just the ripple effects of that trade, just because of like the OG injuries and what he got. It was one of the most fascinating trades in recent memory.
Big time.
I think. I'm with you on everything you said about RJ. The jumper is just going to come and go. Like I know a lot of people be like, well, can he hit threes? No, it's not going to happen. I'm out on that. The finishing though, I found myself buying into when normally I take everything that happens in a small sample size with a heavy dose of skepticism. I thought the Raptors did a very good job of either mostly getting him the ball in spots where he didn't need to create from a dead stop. And so having that movement either before or on the catch, like I just think it opened up pockets for him. And if you're going to continue, hopefully to improve the spacing around him, I would buy, because he's always been like, he'll take physical shots. They're not going to go in, but like if you actually give him space with which to work or where he doesn't have to create, like I said, from that dead stop, I'm in. I fave it. I think his finishing will be closer to for real than not.
Dude, kudos to you for watching Raptors games toward the end of the year, because I mean you're totally right. It was two of
my sons. RJ and Emmanuel
I know. Man, they had that 18 whatever the 13 game losing streak. It was tough for us in the media to like sit there and watch that. But you're right about catching it on the go. The other thing I wanted to mention is that he is Yeah, he still is. He is the only left-handed player on the team, right? He doesn't occupy
Hard
the
departure
same.
from where he was in New York, where he was
Exactly.
80, I think.
Exactly. He doesn't occupy the same space as Julius Randle or Jalen Brunson. I don't know how much that impacts the thing. I haven't asked him that question. I would love to eventually. But I think being the only left-handed guy where it's like, hey, I'm guaranteed to go left and there will be an opening for me to go left has helped a little bit.
What about Sasha Vezenkov? No, I'm just kidding. Where is he going to everyone knows I love me some Dick. So where's
Nice.
Grady Dick?
Hell yeah.
What are we watching for with Grady Dick?
He was sick towards the end of last year. The shooting came around. He was always a little things king. Like he was making the extra pass, attacking, crashing closeouts, and like grabbing offensive rebounds he has no business grabbing. Like he was always doing the little things, but the jumper just wasn't falling. Towards the end of the year, it started falling, and it started falling at a really, really great rate. I think it was like 40% from January onwards. And so it's like, hey, becoming more consistent with that 3-point shot. He showed a little bit of an off the bounce game too, where it's like if they set up 2 pin downs for him, he can kind of explode out of that escape dribble or pound dribble and then settle into a jumper. And that's like, hey, that would be incredible to watch with Scotty. And just the dribble handoff stuff. It's improving as a playmaker, making those decisions. He is nowhere close to being a good defender yet. But he has the size to eventually, I think, be like neutral on that end. And if you can get that eventually, that would be a huge win.
I actually think that if he's someone that, and by the way, the escape dribble stuff and like the, attacking off of closeouts, I can't remember which game I was watching, but he like dribbled into a pull up and I was just like smitten from that moment. I'm like, okay, if he has those counters, I don't think he's going to be someone that defenses can just attack. I thought he would be coming into the league, but then I went back before the season. I was watching stuff. Adam Spinella told me, like, you need to look at where he is, like, with his positions. And, like, he seems like he's going to get that down. And so do I think he's going to be a great defender? But no, but if you're 6'7" and know where to be and know how to use space to your advantage, whether you're guarding on or off the ball, you use the word neutral. I would think that that's like
a plus. Yeah, I'm down.
Yeah. I would say I would say it's a plausible, like it's plausible that that's what he becomes. Whereas I've seen a lot of rhetoric over the past few months, like, oh yeah, defenses are gonna like think that he's like barbecue. And like, okay, maybe like he's gonna be a sophomore, but I just don't think he's gonna be that much of a liability long term.
I think it's strength. Like right now, it's just getting stronger because he gets pushed off his spot really easily. And so the size is a factor, but if you can just play bigger and play stronger, then you'll be able to, like you said, kind of find your spots and be a good team defender at least. So like that version of Grady, he's probably starting next year. I don't know if it's going to be Bruce Brown. I don't know if it's going to be Grady.
So weird.
There is 10 6'4" guys on the roster. It went from Vision 6'9" to Vision 6'4" in a matter of 6 months. And I don't know how to sift through that weird, like 4 or 5 man rotation type of thing that they have with the shooting guard spot. I just don't know what they're going to do with it at all.
Yeah. And so it is weird that this team went from, is that like kind of when you look at the roster, the most glaring need is we could use some more properly sized wings.
Yeah, it's like the guy they will be chasing for, and this was apparent the moment they traded OG. It was like the guy that they need is OG. That is the one type of player that they're looking for, and they're probably going to look for him for years to come. It just those guys don't grow on trees. That defensive minded player, 3-and-D type. Those guys don't. Like, yes, they do. You think that they do, but successfully being a 3-and-D player who can make his shots like OG does and defend the ball like OG does, incredibly rare. And so that's the type of player that they're looking for. They last year they were banking on Ochai Agbaji to be the guy for them on the defensive end, and that's tough. It's like that's why they brought in Davion
Dick, I think, defending
yeah, and they that's why they traded for Davion Mitchell and drafted Jamal Shead. It's like we just need to find defense wherever we can because it's rough out there at the point of attack.
And they're also, I mean, one, if they're going to continue with Vision 6'4", Javonte Green, I'll always be in the bag for just kind of sitting out there. I think
I like that.
He's bigger, but might as well just add him. But actually, they're also in a weird spot too, because you could go out and say, like, let's use Dorian Finney-Smith as an example. Like, you could get a plug and play 3-and-D wing, but if they're actually concerned about the bigger picture, you're trying to find someone who's younger and probably has
Yeah.
a higher ceiling than DFS. So you're not just going to go and I guess necessarily trade for fit at this point, unless you come out of the gates and you're better than expected as a team. And that's something you consider because you have all these like expiring salary like Bruce Brown
Yeah.
specifically, but Davion Mitchell's in a contract year. There's the Vazenkov cap hit for now. We don't know what
Boucher
happens.
too, right? Yeah.
Uh,
I'm
around
sorry, man.
not
I'm
allowed to
sorry.
trade.
I
Well,
know.
honestly, trade him to a team that will start him and he'll win a Finals MVP if they're headed to the playoffs.
Throw him on Phoenix or something. They could use whatever.
You're gonna have to take Nurkic back at that point. You really want him on this roster?
No. I agree with you though. I think they're in an interesting spot. Like overall, I was thinking about this the other day, but this is very pre Kyle and DeMar Raptors, where they had Kyle and DeMar and they just had hired Dwayne Casey. And there was this makings of a team where you're like, this is interesting, but there's also a lot of these random players on the roster where you're not sure about. They had, in 2012, 2013, they had Allen Anderson, and I think they still had Jose Calderon for a year, and Rudy Gay was still on that roster. And it's like they were still sorting through one era while trying to enter another one. And it still feels like that right now, even though, they're trying to shift it and say the future is now, et cetera, et cetera. There are still some like lingering things, the Bruce Brown of it all, the Chris Boucher, the Sasha Vazenkov, like how they deal with all that stuff will likely impact the rest. And by the way, when you said like young 3-and-D guy, I was really hoping they were going to go for Pat Williams. They reportedly were going to go for Pat Williams. And I'm not some big Patrick Williams believer, but he kind of fits the mold of what they needed in that 3-and-D archetype. He's younger. He's like 24. If he consistently hits his shots, that would be great. He's a good defender. I don't know. I hope that they would go for that.
Like sometimes he'll do I know he had the Kawhi comparisons because like when he dribbles into his pull up, sometimes it looks like that, but like he doesn't actually like monopolize any offensive usage. And so someone like that would be perfect for this team because you have RJ, you have Scotty, you have IQ for that. I know very little about Jamal and Jacoby Walter other than like the basic stuff. Do you have any thoughts on them or any insight into what type of role you might expect them to play right out of the gate for this team?
I think Jamal will spend a lot of time with the G League. I think he's like been brought in to be like captain of 905 basketball type of thing. Maybe he gets some run with the Raptors. It would be great. I know he's on a guaranteed contract, so he likely will. And I think it'll be either him or Davion Mitchell as the backup point guard of this team, at least for next season. I think it'll be up for grabs. I don't think it's kind of a foregone conclusion that Davion's going to get it or Jamal's going to get it. I think they're going to work and see who gets that spot. But for Jacoby, he is really intriguing. He is like a prototypical 3-and-D guy. He's 6'5". The D right now is very theoretical, just because he got blown by a lot in college, and like he has this ridiculous wingspan. He's 6'10", I think, wingspan or whatever. So that helps be this great off-ball defender, but the on-ball stuff needs a lot of growth. I think the pathway for him is shooting, similar to Grady Dick. It's like, hey, if you can stay on the floor just because of your jumper, you'll be able to grow these other aspects of your game, whether it be the defensive side, the off the dribble creation, all that type of stuff that they hope he can eventually get to. I think for them, it's let's see Scotty Barnes next to a bunch of good shooters in Grady, in IQ, in Jacoby. And that's pretty much it. But like, let's see how those, Yeah. Oh yeah. You're right. Yeah. And like, let's see if those guys can kind of have this chemistry going. I don't know. I feel like they're trying to build a Sacramento Kings-esque type of offense where Scotty is your Sabonis type and these other guys are just kind of running around Scotty trying to create openings. We'll see if that works. We'll see if that process, that philosophy offensively makes sense. But I think that's the idea they have with guys like Grady, Jacoby, IQ, etc.
Do you think they have enough of that conceptual shooting to, I would say, optimize specifically RJ and Scotty, to where I believe like you can count them as shooters if you want, but like you want to surround, if those guys are ever going to have the ball in their hands, you want to surround them with, and even just, if you're talking about Scotty in the post or at the elbows, like Kelly Olynyk becomes super important to this team then, because that's just not something that's going to work with Jakob Poeltl on the floor. Do they have enough? I'm not even saying proven, but enough of, okay, well, maybe this guy fits that mold.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not the Pistons when it comes to spacing. I think they're like a little bit, they're a step above that, you know? I like IQ is a huge equation he's a huge answer to this equation just because of his, again, catch and shooting and pull up shooting combination. It's a massive threat to have, not only in pick and roll situations, but off of the ball, using him in like pin down situations, whatever, floppy, whatever you want to call it. I think that's the aspect that they'll lean on heavily. That starting group, like you mentioned, it looked good offensively. Like they had figured out a style, and I think Jakob plays an important part because of the high post playmaking. Like Scotty is an excellent cutter. RJ was a pretty good cutter last year. They're going to use that to find openings inside, but ultimately it's about, hey, can those guys hit their shots? And I think I would bet that they do have the theoretical shooting to give them the space, to give them that opportunity to create shots and let Scotty and RJ cook on the inside.
The final question that I have for this team is, I know it feels like they are planning for the future, but they also feel like they might be in this weird fluid state, because what if you've paid a couple guys, you have some guys on sizable, not
Yeah.
necessarily huge, but sizable contracts. There is a chance, just based off the talent, that you could be better than expected. And if
Yeah.
you're in that scenario, is this team more likely? And again, we are just so many eons away from the regular season. But if this team is not bad, like the developmental type of bad, are they more likely to steer in to becoming the developmental type of bad, or using some of these contracts and like seeking out actual needs from veterans on the trade market?
I've always thought of they're trying to emulate, and that's why I brought up that older team with like Rudy Gay and all those guys. I think they're trying to replicate exactly what they did then. You know, it was, hey, let's draft Terrence Ross. Let's develop Terrence Ross as much as we possibly can. But then let's package Terrence Ross in a first round pick for Serge Ibaka. We need a big man. Let's get Serge Ibaka. Hey, we like Grievous Vasquez. He gave us 2 very, very fun years. Great player. But let's trade him for a first round pick and a second round pick. Those picks became OG Anunoby and Norm Powell. And so it's this weird thing where they're trying to, I guess, thread a needle from, hey, let's develop these guys to become good to decently good players. And then eventually we can mold them or mold the team around whatever we want to. So I wouldn't be surprised if they say, hey, 2 years from now or a season from now, we're actually better than we thought. We're like, we're a 9 seed or an 8 seed or whatever. And let's go out and get, I don't know, Cam Johnson, because we need that 3-and-D type of guy or whatever. Or I don't know. There's other guys that you can mention. People have brought up Wiggins and DeAndre Hunter. I'm not that sold on those two. I think Cam Johnson would make more sense. But regardless, like maybe that type of move would make sense for this team if they're in that area. My question to you, though, and I know we're going to talk about these teams eventually in the rest of this episode, but like the East is bad. They are dog shit. Like it's very, very bad. And so maybe they luck into a play-in spot, because I don't see this team being worse than some of the teams that we're going to mention right now. It's just hard to envision them like bottoming out to the point where they're in the conversation for one of the worst records in the
Yeah.
league compared to some of these other teams that we'll talk about.
Yeah, and that's tough, because if you're not doing it right out of the gate, it seems like there are going to be more teams that are at least not putting their best foot forward right out of the gate. Whereas Utah's an example, and we will get to them, but
Yeah.
they've been a team that's steered out of like good vibes middle of the season the past 2 years. They are, Larry Market or not, they're just going to be full on in rock bottom mode. And
Yeah.
so if you're the Raptors and you're not doing that from the jump, you're almost in a situation where, okay, well, if we're like within striking distance of a play-in spot, is it better for us to like have the 12th pick, or just the ninth pick, or like to actually just go in and get these guys some play-in high stakes experience and find someone who maybe look, you mentioned Cam Johnson, which is, he's not young, but someone who straddles the line of, okay, this guy helps us now, but he can be around for a while and fits into a bunch of different iterations
Yeah.
of our roster.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I I think it's an interesting spot to be in for them, because they have the infrastructure they think they want to build with in the next couple of years with Scotty, RJ, and IQ. And that's always fluid. Like that always changes. Yes, for the most part, you're believing in Scotty, and clearly
Yeah.
you're believing in IQ. But I think they're very fluid in terms of, hey, if this doesn't work in a couple of years, we are willing to change it up and change into something else, because they're not dead set on anything really right now, other than Scotty Barnes.
As
They
they
are not
should
that,
be.
and I agree. And like, look, hey, he has that all NBA stipulation in his contract for next year. If he turns into an all NBA type of player, more power to him. Incredible design. Like that would be incredible development for the Raptors to move forward and build with, because now you have something that tangibly can be an all NBA type player.
Anything else about this team you think we should discuss before we get to the vibe meter for
I
their rebuild?
think, hey, actually, speaking of vibes, I think the vibes will be much, much better for the Toronto Raptors this season than compared to last year. Last year sucked because, hey, from getting sued by the Knicks to Jonte Porter to Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby getting traded and all the other stuff, and, your coach pizza parties, all that type of stuff. Like it was terrible vibes pretty much all throughout. I think the vibes will be much, much higher next season. So, yeah.
Hey, and it'll have Jonte Porter pleading guilty to taking Fred VanVleet too literally. That will be in the rear view by that point. So what is the vibe meter? And just basing this off of just the longer term progression of this team, the state of their current rebuild, but also trying to scale ahead on just a vibe meter on the scale of 1 to 10. Where are you at with Toronto?
I think I'm going to give him a 6. I don't know if that's high or low. I have a couple of, meters here for the other teams we're going to talk about, but I have them as a 6 because they have somewhat of a foundation with Scotty and IQ. The rest of it is just whatever, and we'll see what happens. And with RJ too, the same thing applies. It's like, we'll see what happens. I just think as a franchise, they are in, to bring it back to what I said earlier, they are in R&D mode, like research and development. Let's just see what we got.
I'm gonna crib that so hard all the time. R&D mode, I love it. I'm gonna give them an 8.1, and I'd have them at like an 8.6 if I thought their fan base in general was ready for what's like kind of a quasi rebuild or a full on rebuild. But we have a couple just I don't even know if they're Raptors fans at this point. They seem to hate other Raptors fans in our Discord, but based off the stuff they've sent and some of the things I see retweeted onto my timeline,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like Raptors fans, like just based off last year, what they were calling for. So I'm going to knock them down a peg just for that. But
Fair.
the word I look at this team with, there's ambiguity, but it's like in the form of optionality. And so I value that. And I am in on Scotty and IQ specifically. And I think having two guys that you can say are the centerpieces of a rebuild, that's like finding one is tough. To have found two, I think is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we will get into that with a couple of these teams where it's like, what is the direction? I think part of, to your point, finding something is just finding some kind of direction to pick. Like picking something and going with it is something a lot of franchises struggle with, and the Raptors did for 2 or 3 years, not knowing what to do with Pascal and Fred and OG and all those guys. They've officially picked a direction. We'll see how it goes.
This next team, and we're going to go in reverse alphabetical order here for people who they feel like they get robbed. It's like, oh, we didn't talk about the Wizards enough. Well, look, the Washington Wizards are up right now. And so the way I frame this is I'm going to ask basically what will be cliche questions. It's just like the one big question for each team, but we want to have a general discussion on anything that comes to mind. My one big cliche question that I think could appear like if you were doing first take for the Wizards.
Yeah.
Do they have their primary building block on the roster? And I think there's two options. It's Bilal Coulibaly or Alex Sarr. Or is it more likely that that player is yet to come to Washington?
I would lean that it is yet to come to Washington. I like those guys a lot. I like Sarr. I like Bilal. I like that they're leaning into this defensive kind of identity with those two guys. I like Bob Carrington also, that they traded for and drafted. But I don't think any of those guys are generational, we're building around type of players. And I still think they're figuring out what they want to be, not just in terms of what kind of team they want to build, but like what kind of philosophy they have towards team building. They've drafted Bilal, who's like this 3-and-D type who might be able to grow into something more. They have Sarr, who again theoretically can be this really unique type of big man. But what else are they trying to play with? What is the idea? What is the identity? That is something that I guess the Wizards have struggled with for years and years and years. I feel like they still struggle with it. It's finding out what they want to be,
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's probably more likely they're not on the roster yet, and maybe I'll feel differently if Alex Sarr ever starts connecting on his screens. But I really like Bilal Coulibaly. I think he's probably closer to that than I would even have Sarr there. I just don't know. I didn't love I don't know what your thoughts were in the Denny Avdia trade. Maybe that's something you could touch on next. I didn't necessarily love it for them, but I also viewed it as okay, well, if you're getting rid of him, maybe that means more on ball experience for Bilal Coulibaly, where I think he's more than just a 3-and-D type. On defense, I don't know if he's going to make any all defense teams, but I think we will view him in just the same vein as these players where he won't get picked on and he just might be really good. He can be disruptive. He might gamble sometimes, but the positional spectrum and the level of difficulty on his assignments last year impressed me to no end. And I saw some just, I don't know, like Zach Lowe uses the word like verve. It's like some verb or wiggle when he did have the ball and we get going downhill. So
Yeah.
I'm intrigued there. But I also don't know, okay, well, you have Bub Carrington. What type of responsibility are you saddling him with? There's the Jordan Poole of it all, where it's even if you're not using him as a central option, like he's still cannibalizing touches. Malcolm Brogdon's on this roster right now. Does that stick?
Yeah.
There's
Right.
Tyus Jones back. So I'm very curious. And Kyle Kuzma, who's very good. I'm not knocking. It just feels like there's still too many functional divergences from where they need to be to discover who they're actually supposed to be. And that's like, I look, and I'm so intrigued by like other players on this roster too. I thought Jules Bernard was great for them last year. And I like Vucevic, who they brought back on a two-way deal because of the way their big man stuff is set up. So I think there are some intriguing flyers. I just don't know, like, are they just going to wait until the end of the season again to like really explore the depths of those flyers? I don't know. And that's what makes me, I'm not saying they need to trade everybody, but like, I think at least to start, and that's how I viewed Denny Avdi, was like, do you have an on-ball focal point of the future? I viewed him as that. And so unless you think that's Bilal, or unless you think that's, it's definitely not Sar, unless you think that's Bub Carrington, who again, he's 6'4". I don't know a ton about how he's going to translate to the NBA. They're not confusing. I think they're doing the right thing. And I like a lot of the stuff the front office has done. I just like, this was the team when I was going through the vibe meter. It was like the toughest for me to reconcile, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you on the Avdia thing. I think they're leaning into Sar being the 4 and JV, who they signed, being the 5. And it seems like Sar is not down to be a center long term. Like he's looking at himself as more of a 4 than a 5. So maybe they just envisioned it as, Avdia and him are going to clash. So let's move out. I don't know. Maybe that's the thinking that they had behind that, but I don't necessarily like. He had a good year for them and he improved drastically as a shooter. So, man, I don't know. I think they, for the most part with the Wizards, to your point, it feels like they are halfway in and halfway out on this rebuild of guys that they have that could be interesting contract wise with Kuzma. We didn't mention Corey Kispert, who I think is like, get him onto a good team and he will be able to be a good rotation player for them. I think they're ready to bottom out for at least 2 more seasons to see how the lottery odds kind of gift them. Because if they get like Cooper Flagg or Ace Bailey or Cameron Boozer, then we're probably looking at this situation completely differently.
Yeah, and it's, you mentioned that where it's like it doesn't seem they're half in, half out. It's like, no, they're very clearly, you're right on that. It feels like they're half in, half out, except they are going to be bad.
Yeah.
It's just the entire package of how they're going to get to be bad. That's what feels sort of half baked right now. And that comes with the caveat. There's a lot of offseason left. I viewed the Jonas Valanciunas signing, one, I'm going to bump them up a notch on my vibe scale just because you beat out the Lakers. You were willing to, I don't know if the Lakers they weren't going to give them less. So you're able to get Jonas Valanciunas instead of the Lakers. I more viewed it as just, we're going to try and spare Sar from having to guard like the big, burly, massive 5s. But if there's something out there that he doesn't want to be a 5, stop watching these Anthony Davis sound bites then, because like you're a 5. Like when I watch Sar, if he's going to succeed in the NBA, I feel like it's as a 5.
I agree with you. And maybe it is the whole Wemby Collins thing where they're like, hey, let's bring in another big man just to kind of eat some minutes. Maybe it is that. But I saw a couple of reports where it's like he doesn't want to go to Atlanta because they think in Atlanta he doesn't want to play next to Jalen Johnson and be the center, all that type of stuff. I don't know if that's actually accurate. Maybe that's just draft filibuster, hoopla, whatever. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. With the Wizards, it's just, they won less than 20 games last year, right? That was a correct number. I think it was 17, right? I think it was 17.
So I don't even have the win totals pulled up, but I think didn't we have like 3 teams lost 60 games last year? Yeah. More than 60 games. So yeah, the Wizards, 15 wins. You gave them too much credit.
There you go. So like, just get 20. Let's see if you can take some tangible steps forward with Bilal and Sar and Corey Kispert and Jonas Valanciunas. He's good for 2 wins. Like I don't know. Just keep building towards it.
There's probably I would like this roster so much better if Denny Avdija was on it. I guess I'm not
Yeah.
over the Denny Avdija trade.
Yeah,
Like
that's
Denny
fair.
Avdija trade PTSD.
What is your vibes? What's the rating for it? What'd you give them?
I'm gonna give them because I think they have the right vision of at least we're gonna be bad until we're ready to be good, even though they have
Yeah.
some of the veterans. I'm gonna give them a solid 6.2. And
Okay.
again, I think they would be higher if Denny Avdija was still in the. I just thought I know a lot of people thought that was a great return. It was probably fine, but like I, I don't. He was so good last year. Like when they
Yeah.
put the ball in his hands, he became a most improved player candidate, and just what he could do defensively. So, and it's nothing. I don't know if they've done anything necessarily. I don't think they've done anything wrong. I should frame it. I don't know. I wish I had more clarity on like, is Kyle Kuzma, like what is going on there? Is he still going to be there at the trade deadline? The Jonas Valanciunas stuff with, well, how does that impact how you're going to try and develop Sar? And then all the sort of different guards that are on the roster. What does that mean for Bilal's role? But look, they're in the green. Solid 6.2. Where do you have them at?
I feel like I'm being harsh with these teams now because I gave the Raptors 6. I'm giving the Wizards 5. You know, I don't know.
I mean,
Yeah, look, 5 out of 10 just because I think they have the right approach with certain things, but there's absolutely nothing set in foundation. I love Sar, I love Bilal. I think they're cool, interesting players, but I don't think those are pillars to build on top of. And so I'm just kind of like, hey, you're doing the right things, but it hasn't really amounted to anything. So that's why it's 5 out of 10.
this next team, speaking of confusing as hell, the Utah Jazz. The cliche big question what are they doing or what are they going to do with Lauri Markkanen? And do they even need to get rid of him to effectively rebuild?
I don't think so. I think they are in a position where, like, okay, 2 years ago, they traded Mike Conley. They traded a couple of their other players. I think it was Malik Beasley and whatnot, and they petered out. Like, it just didn't work, right? They just tanked. Last year, they didn't really make too many moves, but they just started to be bad defensively, and then it flamed out, and they got to the spot where they kept their pick. And so this year, knowing that Oklahoma City owns their first round pick, I believe it's top 10 protected, where if they land in the top 10, they're good and they keep their pick, whether or not we'll see. For the most part, I think just because they have Lowry, I'm pretty high on whatever they do with him because based on the Mikal Bridges situation, it seems like the return on Lowry is going to be incredible, regardless of if they decide to keep him or not, or if they extend him. So if they end up getting 4 or 5 first round picks for Lowry and they just bought him out, I could see a world in which they get a generational talent in the next couple of seasons or next couple of drafts, whatever. Obviously can't bank on lottery odds, but still. And they have this interesting group of young guys where if one of them pops, we look at this team differently. So there's, Keontae George, obviously Bryce Sensabaugh. There's Walker Kessler, which apparently they want to trade and they want nothing to do with anymore. I'm not sure why, but whatever.
One of the most bizarre arcs when you look
at
what happened from rookie season to now.
Yeah, he Team USA player a couple of years ago, and now just bench player.
Everyone thought he was better than Rudy Gobert at one point, which was always just blasphemous. But to go from there to they want to get rid of you, but they also want more than 2 first round picks for you, which is very bizarre is the word.
I think I'm generally high on the Jazz though, because they have Lowry, and I think he is a player worth building around. So whether they decide to actually build around him and invest in him and extend long term, or they decide to trade him, I think it's kind of a win-win situation because you either have your guy and you believe you have the kind of pool around him to build on top of, or you trade that guy, you get a massive return, and you're cooking with a very bad team, but a team that probably has a really bright future.
I'm excited that it seems like we're going to diverge on this because they need to strip it down. And that doesn't need to, I agree with you, doesn't need to include moving Lowry, but you have too many competent veterans on this roster right now who are going to crib playing time from some of the, like if you think, I don't think you can rebuild around Lowry. I think he can be a part of whatever iteration you want to do, but you need a player who's better than him. I don't think he alone prevents you from being bad enough to draft that player. I don't know if he's good enough for you to go out and use these assets to go and trade for that player. But if you think, they clearly don't think it's Walker Kessler.
Yeah.
But if you think it's Keontae George, then you need to put yourself in a position where it's like, well, then what are Jordan Clarkson and Colin Sexton still doing on this roster? And what are we doing where I love Cody Williams. I think that was a great pick by them. But like, let's put some real wings on this roster, not to where are you trying to peddle Taylor Hendricks as a wing. Defensively, sure, but offensively, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. No. Yeah.
And so there needs to be some rotational clear up here because I do think in terms of and I like Keontae George. Do I think that he can be the focal point of everything they do moving forward? I didn't see enough last year to say yes, and I would probably lean towards no. So if you're trying to get that player, and it just feels like, I already said this, that their assets are doing a lot of the heavy lifting of, they can figure out a way to be fine. I just don't know if they have that. They have a lot of good young players, but you need to get that great tentpole option. And to be bad enough to do that, multiple names have to go. I'm not saying it needs to be marketed. If he doesn't want to be on a bad team, that's something to get into. But they've tried to straddle this line for too long. And if you're not going to and I'm not saying they should cash in those other teams' draft picks to get better right away. I think that was a bluff on Danny Ainge's part heading into the offseason. But okay, if you're not going to trade some of these veterans or really lean into being bad out of the gate, I'm not talking, I think what's hurt them actually is they've been better than expected in the middle of the year than internally they thought.
2 years in a row. Yeah.
Yeah. Last year, even the first year, if you talked yourself into, Mike Conley was still on the team. This year specifically, no one saw that winter run come. That had to take them off guard, catch them off guard. So that's what is my real concern with this roster. Is I like a lot of the players, both veterans and youngsters, but to get to a point where you have the tentpole of your rebuild, he is not there as good as Lowry is. And you've done nothing on either end of the spectrum via trade or trading away your own players to ensure you're there for the draft to get that player.
So I agree with the Clarkson, Sexton, Walker, Kessler aspect of things, because you do need room and playing time to eventually play the guys that you want to develop 100%. And I'm kind of curious to see why they haven't cashed in on those guys yet, because I feel like Jordan Clarkson can help a team. I feel like Colin Sexton maybe for a younger team could make sense. Same thing with Walker, Kessler eventually. I don't know. That part of it is confusing to me, and I agree with you. But for Lowry, I guess my question to you would be, do you think they would benefit from extending him and then trading him? Or do you think they would benefit from trading him right away? Because he is 26 or 27. I don't think he has interest in playing on a bad team, or at least a team that
does seem to love Utah. I don't know if that's just, I'm not going to, nuke my market of a team that can give me a max money potentially this year.
True. Yeah.
He seems to love Utah. So, and you're right, he is 27. I think ultimately, I do think the reason he came on the trade market is because Danny Ainge saw what happened with Mikal Bridges. That definitely factored into it. Yeah. What is different, though, is that he is in a contract year right now. And with Mikal Bridges, I do think part of the appeal was he's going to play with his friends. And that's why the specter of, is Jalen Brunson going to sign an extension this offseason, which is fucking stupid financially.
Wild. Insane. Yeah.
But is it the same thing with Mikal where it's, in 6 months, he's going to be willing to sign the $3 and $109 million extension rather than him seeking max or near max money? With Lowry, it feels like not only is he going into an expiring contract, but this isn't someone you're expecting to take less than you might think he would get on the open market. Ultimately, though, I think you need to extend him, even if it's you want to trade him next summer or the one day that he could technically be eligible. And by the way, if I'm marketing, I don't want to relocate midseason, so I'm signing that renegotiate and extend on August 7th. Right. I'm not signing it on August 6th so I could be traded on February 6th. I think he has more value on an extension. Would you agree? Even if he is brought up to the max, and maybe it's you bring him up to the max this year, but then it's declining from there. I ultimately think just having him on the books for more years makes him more valuable, both from, what direction are we going in? We can plan around this. Or if we ultimately want to move him, I would think they could get more for him.
I guess it would be, from one side, it would be harder from a contract perspective if he does get a max to trade him. But on the other side, having a player like that long term where you're going to get him for the rest of his prime is the sell, right? And so if you're the Warriors and you're like, hey, we have Andrew Wiggins' contract, we have all these little contracts here and there that we can squabble up and trade for Markkanen, and we'll give you every single pick that we have available. You would rather do that for a long-term extended Lauri Markkanen than the Markkanen that's, 6 months away from an extension and all that type of stuff. I think that value add probably is what led Sacramento to not put everything on the table for him, because I think I thought that was an excellent fit. If they were to go out and get Lauri Markkanen, I thought that would have changed their trajectory as a team. I think that's it puts them in the top 4 in the Western Conference type of conversation. Maybe you don't feel that way, but I just think the fit was so excellent in Sacramento. probably the reason they didn't decide to, or they haven't decided to yet, go for him is because they don't know if he's going to be willing to sign on long term.
And so, yeah, no, I'd agree that for that team, people mentioned the Thunder, of course. There are a bunch of
Yeah.
teams that I think the Spurs, I'd say
Yeah.
some inflammatory things if he ends up on the Spurs.
Absolutely. And they have the assets now to do it. Like they have those 2031 picks and 2032. Like they've done their due diligence to
I
be
guess what's
ready.
tough about Utah though is, are you at a point where like, should you still be taking back picks, or is it we need young, because you have all these picks from, like, you've shorted Cleveland, the Lakers, the
Yeah.
Timberwolves as futures, or is it, oh, like the Cavs and the Timberwolves look like they're pretty well set up, so maybe we do need some of these other distant, but like the Spurs are offering distant first round picks from the Timberwolves at that point. So
they also, but they, like, the Jazz are in a weird spot where they also have a lot of young players, like Taylor Hendricks. We just mentioned a bunch of them. Keontae George, Cody Williams. They just drafted Isaiah Collier. They drafted 3 rookies in this draft. It's like they have so many guys that they need to develop. And to your point, like making room for them is part of that. How do you balance, hey, we need more young players, but we also have a lot of young players on a roster that doesn't necessarily have a lot of like fluidity and makes a lot of sense in terms of positionally. Like they don't have the cornerstone guy, but they also have way too many young players to figure out who that cornerstone guy is, which is a weird spot to be in. But I don't know. I actually, so I'm, this is crazy. My rating for them, my vibe meter rating, I gave them a 7 out of 10 because I am incredibly high on whatever they do with Lowry. If they keep him, cool. That means they're likely going to go out and try to use some of these younger players and picks to eventually build around Lowry and get like another star. And I agree that they probably need, they definitely need another star. Or they trade Lowry and they get a return. They absolutely suck for 2 years and they get to a point where they can like rebuild and have these young guys play what they want to. I don't know. I'm high on them because I think they have this really, really great asset in Lowry, and eventually it'll turn out into something. But also they have to turn it into something, which is the tricky part.
And this is with the caveat that I think this is a team with swing potential that it could literally implode or explode tomorrow.
Yeah.
I have a 4.6 out of 10.
That's the lowest.
I love the young players they have, but I'm just worried at this point that they're unnecessarily extending the life of this rebuild to where I'm not saying they should go and cash in their assets for something. For all the players that you say you love, and again, Cody Williams and Taylor Hendricks, I think are underrated prospects. Clear up more playing time for them. And the fact that they haven't done that, and like there's still rumors out there. I know part of this is the smoke screen by design, but it doesn't seem like they've chosen a direction to go in yet. And they will. And you know what? They'll be fine once they do. But like, why are we still doing this more than 2 years since you tore it down? And that's why they're at a 4.6 for me.
That's fair. I also forgot John Collins was on this team. I just realized that. Like this, they have another guy
here for them too. And it's just, like, again, that's another, those are guys that you, and look, John Collins, okay, you have Drew Eubanks. You don't have to play Drew Eubanks, but you can't just bench Lowry. You can't bench John Collins. You can't bench Clarkson. Those are guys who will be unhappy if they're not playing.
Exactly.
And I think they have a great coach. They have a ton of assets, but at this point, I'm just like, the assets and the veterans are doing too much of the heavy lifting for what's supposed to be a rebuild.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I hear you.
This next team, I feel like we could blow through because Mo, Dakhil, and I just talked about them extensively. But the San Antonio Spurs, my one cliche big question for them, are they mastering the 2 timelines approach right now?
I could see them making a play-in spot. I don't know. The West is incredibly competitive. Like how in the world are they going to get to 10 or 9 with, I don't know, it seems like 13 teams.
Number though. I've said it way too many times with Devin Vassell, Trey Jones, and Wemby on the floor last year. Sample size of almost 1,800 possessions. They outscored opponents by a +10 per 100.
Yeah, they were very good. Yeah.
And that's like you just added Chris Paul, and Harrison Barnes is solid.
Yeah.
And so it's just like they have to be, and now you know how to use Wemby. You would think they'd be better, but I didn't mean to interrupt. It's just that I keep harping on that number because they were so bad.
No, they should be better. Yeah. No question that they should be better. How much better is the question? Like, what are they going to get to in terms of win percentage and all that stuff? I agree with you that. And by the way, Steph Castle, I think, is like ready to play right now and going to chip in almost.
I'm glad I don't have a great feel for him, but I actually didn't love that pick when they then traded their number 8 pick. I wanted to see more of a proven passer or shooter for them to go get. And aren't those like mega question marks
Yeah.
for him?
Yeah, no, they are. They definitely are. I'm curious though if the reason they brought in CP is like, hey, mold this guy into a guy who might be able to do some of those aspects eventually. And like we've seen Chris Paul elevate teams before that didn't have much of a chance of making the playoffs. You add and you give him a guy like Wemby to play with. I think that's a lot of fun. I give them a 10 out of 10 in terms of vibes, meters, and checks because it's like Wemby is he's
Over.
not, yeah, he's like he's 9 of 10 of the vibes meter checks is just him. And he likely will win defensive player of the year next year. So yeah, we'll see.
11 out of 10 for me as well, even with the
Nice.
doubts about Steph Castle. I would like to know, though, if they're willing to cash in some of those assets. I liked Trae Young for them more than most. I'm not saying they should have done that,
Same.
but on like like the Lowry stuff, that would be, I think, a smaller scale move functionally, where he wouldn't disrupt the way that your team plays.
Yeah.
I am wondering if they do like turn out to be good. Are they willing to cash in some of those assets now, or are they so invested in the two timeline approach where it's we have these veterans, we'll be better this year, we'll continue to grow. Now we have these picks though that like we'll either use them in the future and reload our rotation as we get more expensive, or we will cash them in down the road in a few years. I'm just curious, like if they're just better than expected, are they willing to like are they actually willing to trade for Lowry? And did the Harrison Barnes of it all, did that change their calculus at all? Like you could use him as matching salary, of course, but when I saw them make that move, I was like, oh, are they, at least for the time being, is Lowry not available, or are they just out on making that type of a move?
I think it'll depend on how quickly Wemby is as good as we know he'll be. Like, if obviously he had an incredible historical rookie season, but if he's like a top 10 player solidified next year,
Which is possible.
which is totally plausible. And then, the year after that, he ends up being in the MVP conversation and top 5 player, all that type of stuff. If that's the trajectory that Wemby is on and he gets there that quickly, I think they'll be more willing to be aggressive. But I don't think they know that yet. I think they're playing it safe. They're saying, hey, if it takes him a couple more years to get to that level, we're fine playing the slow game, but we're willing to accelerate things if things happen, which is why they get 11 out of 10. I'm down. Why not? Let's do
11
it.
of 10, some notes, but almost no notes.
Yeah. Yeah.
This next team, I'm sure we have plenty of notes for. The Portland Trailblazers.
Whew.
My cliche big question for them is, what are we looking to see from Scoot Henderson in his sophomore year? Aside from, let's hope he doesn't get injured out of the gate.
Yeah. What are we looking to see from any of these players is my question.
How long you got? I've got a very long list.
Yeah. Cause like the backcourt is interesting. I don't think Shaedon Sharpe is a 3. I think he's more of a 2. And so how do you slot in, Simons and Scoot next to him? I just don't think Simons makes sense for that team long term if they want to give the developmental reps to Sharpe and Scoot. And also for what it's worth, I think Scoot had a pretty rough first half of the season. He was better in the second half in terms of getting to the basket, making plays, shooting, et cetera, et cetera. But still, there's a lot of room for him to get better.
He shot like, I can't remember if it was 38 or 39% on catch and shoot threes after the All-Star break. And it's like, I believe in the jumper. He actually shot 36% on step back threes last year. I thought as someone who has like that athleticism, the explosion, there is some change of cadence to his on-ball stuff when he gets in the lane. The thing I'm looking for, it might be more of a team thing with him, is there enough spacing to kind of capitalize on? He was a really bad finisher last year. We saw sometimes he can get the floater going, but it wasn't bankable. Was that a product of the spacing? Was that a lack of feel for him when he's going up against sort of NBA defenders? I don't have a great gauge of where he should be there, but I will say I don't think they've done nearly enough to optimize Scoot Henderson specifically, but also the him and Sharpe pairing. Because you're at a point, I agree. I don't think Sharpe is a 3. Defensively or offensively, 2, 3, whatever. Sure. Defensively, I don't think he's a 3. But like Anthony Simons, first of all, shame on the Orlando Magic for not trading for him yet. That's where I'm at with that. But like he's almost important because this team needed to take and make more threes if you want to open up the floor for your young guys. And for some reason, you're housing like 80 centers, and the only one of them that I trust to shoot threes is Duop Reith at this point. So this is a team, we haven't gotten to the vibe check meter yet, but I'm just, again, I like a lot of the individual players on this. I'm a big Rupert fan. I love that kid, but I'm just like, what are we really doing here?
I agree wholeheartedly. It's sort of similar to Washington and Utah, where it's like you have these good guys on the roster in Simons, in Jeremy Grant, by the way, in like Thibault, who could be a good rotation player somewhere. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. He shot.
Not for Australia, apparently. Though, what's that about?
Yeah, I saw that. I don't know what was that about? Why is he? Anyways, it's just they have guys who can be productive for you on a different team, but then they also have these younger players who seemingly fit similar molds to those players. Like having Avdia and Jeremy Grant to me is like, okay, what is the goal here? Are we playing Avdia? Are we playing Jeremy Grant? You have Tumani Kamara, who had a pretty great rookie season, great defensive player.
Yeah.
And so, and then on top of that, the center rotation is confusing too, where it's like, all right, you have Ayton, you have Robert Williams, who's always hurt. Hopefully he gets healthy. And then you have Klingon, who doesn't necessarily do anything different than those guys. You know, Ayton is definitely more of an offensively adept player, but he's not like, it's not like Klingon is some sort of switch up to the philosophy that you have where you're trying to change the way that you play. So I'm just confused as to what the direction is. And similar to Washington and Utah, it's like, hey, are you going to trade these players to give the room necessary to Scoot, to Kamara, to Avdia, to whoever to be able to develop? Or are you just kind of hanging out? Because it feels like they should be better than what they were last year with the sheer talent that they have with like some of the other veterans, but they weren't. And so where is that gap? I'm not sure. I don't know.
And it's some of the stuff is forgivable where it's okay. RW3 is always injured and he'll probably get moved regardless. So having the two primary centers of Ayton and Klingon, who I'm not a Klingon guy. I think that was a terrible pick, but that's not Blazer specific. I would have said that about anyone who went after him so high. And that Avdia trade, because they have Jeremy Grant, it was one of those weird situations where I kind of dislike the trade for both sides, even though I love Denny Avdia. And so I'm with you where it's okay. Denny Avdia and Jeremy Grant feel redundant because defensively, sure, they'll be fine if you want to use one of them as a three. But like offensively, I don't view either one of them as a three right now. Avdia probably comes closest. I trust his playmaking way more. So a lot of the stuff is forgivable on its face, but it starts to compound. And the other questions I have, by the way, what's also forgivable is how injuries kind of maybe derailed the information they had on so many of these kids, specifically Scoot, but also just what are we in year 12 of not knowing what type of coach Chauncey Billups is? Like, what is the guiding philosophy of this team? And I still don't have it. And I honestly think because when you look at Sharp and Scoot and even Simons, and then like, but then you go to Grant and Avdia, but then now Klingon's on this roster.
It's confusing.
What identity are you trying to build here?
Yeah, exactly. It just I gave them, by the way, the spoiler warning, vibe check. I gave them the lowest, I think, out of no. There's one more team that's lower than them in my vibe meters for all these teams. I gave them a 3 out of 10 because I'm confused with what they're trying to do. I have no idea. It feels like every year at the draft they've decided we're going to take the best player available, regardless of position. And sure, that's a great approach to have, but at some point the pieces need to start making sense, and they don't.
I would argue they did not do that this year.
Sure. Yeah. Fair. Yeah, that's fair. And then, you know, from their perspective, it's like, what is the goal you have for your team currently? You have, I believe they have a couple of future first round picks that aren't theirs. They have their own first round picks for the foreseeable future. What is the purpose of this team right now? Are you trying to bottom out to find that generational talent? Do you believe that it is Scoot? Then, okay, facilitate that growth for him better. Yes, I know injuries kind of hampered that, but then there's this weird rotational thing with some of the better players on your roster that are taking up minutes for the players that you want to develop. It's confusing. So I gave them a 3 out of 10.
Yeah, I have them at like a 2-3, and it would be lower, I think, if I wasn't trying to forgive, like, okay, some of this stuff was beyond their control, but the roster construction and what feels like these counterintuitive talents with each other, and then like diverging timelines all over the place. And the Chauncey Billups thing, I don't even know if it's his fault, but like I don't understand what this team is trying to build right now. And that's okay, it's great that you're probably never going to have to convey that pick to Chicago because it's lottery protected until the end of time. But like is that just the goal? Like we just don't ever want to convey that. But I don't know what the goal of this team is. And I the only thing I'm leaving open to say is, okay, if we get just more of a sample with Sharp and Scoot, and we see how like maybe that is what gives them sort of that North Star. I'm still in on Scoot. This overarching vision or lack thereof is really just what gets me with this team.
I think that's a really good way to say it. Like they don't have that North Star, and they also have a bunch of players that are limiting their ability to find that North Star. which is, yeah, I agree. Very confusing team, the Portland Trailblazers.
This next team, I would say they're much less confusing. The Houston Rockets have done basically nothing this offseason aside from draft Reed Shepard. I think the big question here is who is the most important player on this team, and do they even, as good as they are on paper, as good as they were defensively last year, do they? It's kind of the same question we have with the Washington Wizards is do they have their primary cornerstone? And I do believe the reflexive answer should be, well, yeah, it's Şengün. There's just dating back to their interest in Brook Lopez to some of the stuff that's come out of there this summer. I'm just not sure that they're sold that he is this.
Yeah. I'm very surprised that they don't want to give Şengün the max. I think he took a really sizable step last year as a creator, as a guy who could feast in the middle. His 3-point shot improved, all that type of stuff. Like he became a much better player, and I think it's because they finally gave him the infrastructure to be a better player. Adding Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks, I think their defense got much better, and it helped him become a better defender, or at least a feasible defender on that end. I'm surprised with the Şengün stuff because I believe he could be a good cornerstone. But I would say the most important player to me on the Rockets is Amen Thompson. Amen is the guy who I think has the highest ceiling. I think has the ability to change the complexion of this team. And if you look at this roster, they are loaded with young pieces, but I don't think they like those young pieces as, hey, we're going to grow this team organically. They seem kind of hungry to get back to the playoffs, to get back to contention. So I think eventually it'll be, hey, we're going to trade a couple of these pieces for that star. And if they can get another star out of these young guys, whoever it might be, Şengün, Amen, who knows, right? If they can get that one star and then trade the rest of their collective young group for another star, now you're looking at a really, really good team in the West.
Yeah, they have like 12 or 13 players who should like need minutes. And you could argue that they have 14 players if you want to throw Jeff Green and Aaron Holiday in there that need minutes. And so I don't have a problem with them if they don't extend Şengün. Just they have a ton of cap space in 25. So if you want to work with his $16 million cap hold as opposed to the max, which would be more than double that, or a near max would be more than double that, I understand that. That would be my only concern is if they don't really understand who their best, most important player of the future is. I would probably agree that it might be Amen Thompson just internally. That's how I think that they view it. But it does feel like they're sort of loading up for like the next move. But I also love so much, I think Jabari Smith Jr., I don't know if he makes an all-star team, but he could be that caliber. He's just so plug and play at this point at both ends of the floor. Tari Eason, if he stays healthy, incredible defender. I ended up being way high on Reed Shepard coming out of the draft, and he's going to give them spacing that they need. They're a team that could be frisky right away, and they did mention at the end of the season that they're trying to let this marinate. Based off what they did this offseason, sure, but I really do feel like they've leaned themselves up for if the right player becomes available via trade, we will consolidate, or we do have this cap space plan in 2025 to try and get maybe who we view as the best player on our team or the second best player on our team moving forward.
I also don't know what position they'd go for with whatever superstar gets available. Like,
I still think it needs to be like a primary playmaker, right? I love VanVleet, but and I guess Amen Thompson could turn into that, but there are more feels like spacing specifications you'd have to operate by.
But then there's also Reed Shepard, who I guess could play more off ball, but just because virtue of his size, it feels like he has to be the lead ball handler. I don't know. I'm curious to see where they go with the young guys that they have. We didn't even, I don't know, did we mention Cam Whitmore and how that works with Jalen Green? Right. Yeah. Like, and then Tari Eason and Jayshawn Tate and all those guys. It just feels like they have so many young, oh, this guy is interesting type of players. One of those guys needs to pop. But also, I think if I had to bet which one of them pops, it'd be Amen. I think that's the one that intrigues me the most. And maybe they don't see the vision with Amen and Şengün together. Like maybe they just don't believe that that is a fit that works well. So they are trying to pick between the two, but who knows?
I'm going to give you over under. We're talking this time next year. Over under of 1.5 of these players still being on the Rockets roster. Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün, Cam Whitmore, and who's the other guy I wanted to throw in here? Oh, Tari Eason.
I'm going to go over. I think I'm going to go over. Yeah. I think Tari seems like a good candidate to eventually trade for a star type of guy. I think the same probably applies to Jalen Green, who has had moments where I think a player like a team would bet on him, especially if a team is heading into a rebuild. They're like, hey, yeah, we'll see if he can pan out. We'll grab a guy who hopefully could turn into a 20-point scorer in this league. I would still say over though, because I think Şengün and who was the last guy you mentioned? Jabari? Was it Jabari Smith? I can't
Cam
remember.
Whitmore.
Cam Whitmore. Yeah, I think those guys they'll stay long term.
I like that I've made Ahmed and Jabari their untouchables. I'm just way too high on Jabari. I think he fits.
Yeah, they're in a good spot though. Like this is first world problems for the Rockets in the sense that like they're not in a situation like Portland or Utah where you're still trying to figure out things. They've done a good job of drafting. They have all of these interesting players that I think most of the league is high on. It's just about what they do in terms of cashing those guys in or investing in those guys to develop more. I put them at an 8 out of 10 because I'm high on them. I think they were pretty good for most of the season last year. They were near playing. They made it pretty frisky towards the end there too. I think they're probably in that range again this year. Maybe if they stay a little bit more healthy, maybe if Tari Eason plays a little bit more, then it's a different story and they end up getting that 10th or 9th spot. Is that good enough for them? I don't know, but I think that's a step forward. And I'm high on the younger guys. I am genuinely high on Amen and Şengün. Like I believe those guys could be all-star level players. So why not be high on the rest of the crew?
I actually think you're too low was my wow.
Oh, really?
0.5. And the only thing I docked them for is it's the first world problems you mentioned. They have so many guys who need minutes, and they're all like, yeah, okay, if you want to say, oh, well, Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks aren't on the same, but it's like so many of them are just guys who are on the Rockets' longer-term timeline. Yeah. Does that infringe upon any of the development of anyone? Like, does it come at an opportunity cost for multiple guys? And that's my one hesitance, but again, 9.5 out of 10. Like,
wow, okay. Man, I'm too low. Maybe I gotta fix my ratings, man.
I don't know if this team's going to make you any higher, but the Detroit Pistons, the big cliche question, and I actually think it's a question, do they have enough spacing on the roster to streamline the offensive development of their most important youngsters?
Depends on how much you believe in Tobias Harris. I mean, like, look, we have had a lot of conversations about Tobias and his effectiveness. I don't think Tobias for the Sixers is equal to Tobias for the Pistons. They're just completely different rosters, completely different
I don't know
teams.
if you've ever heard Caitlin Cooper mention the soul tax, where a situation becomes so toxic that a player is just worse because everything's compounding. I really believe that Tobias Harris was sort of a soul tax situation in Philly.
I totally agree. And I also think like Detroit isn't going to ask Tobias of the same thing. You know, they're not trying to compete for a championship. They're not trying to compete for playoff spots and seedings and whatnot.
He's making like half as much, not half as much. He's making a lot less than he was in Philly, $20 million more or less. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think he's just slotted in there to be what Jeremy Grant was a couple of years ago, where it's like, hey, be a secondary scorer next to Cade and next to Ivy, be a guy who can be a release valve for those guys, knock down your shots, knock down your catch and shoot shots. Because I think that was something they desperately needed too. It wasn't just the shooting aspect. It was, hey, can we find scoring anywhere else on the floor? And Tobias helps in that realm. And then if you look at the guys that they added or re-signed, and Tim Hardaway Jr., Beasley, and Fontecchio, I think that is enough shooting. It's just about the creativity lineup-wise to put those guys on the floor. I like the JB Bickerstaff hiring. I think that's a pretty good hire. I think ironically, lineup fluidity and creativity offensively was sort of the downfall of the Cavaliers. But again, for what the Pistons need, I think he'll be able to accomplish something and just make it make more sense. That's all I want from the Pistons. Make it make more sense. And yeah, I think they'll be able to do that this season.
I think they're getting there. I think there's enough shooting. I didn't love giving up on Quentin Grimes. I really think that unless there's something about his medicals that I just don't know about in that Tim Hardaway trade, but between Tim Hardaway, shame on the rest of the league. Simone Fontecchio, 2 years, $16 million. I would give him that $16 million a year based off what I saw in Utah and Detroit last year. You have him. You have Marcus Sasser. I thought Cade, he did well. He developed the step back more last year. So there's enough shooting. You mentioned lineup creativity. I think it's big. And I would like to see like Jalen Duren specifically, I want him to have a shorter rope. If he's going to do some of the bullshit he was doing on offense last year and even on defense, I want to see this team like there be more of kind of penalties for that. But I wanted to get into this part with you quickly. If you're looking at their most important youngsters, Cade, Duren, Ron Holland, Jaden Ivey, Marcus Sasser, and Asar Thompson, how would you sort of rank those guys in terms of long-term importance to Detroit?
I still have Cade first. I know people.
People were surprised he got a max extension because he hasn't accomplished anything. And I was like, these extensions are always betting on the conceptual. And I actually think that he's been good enough to like warrant that bet.
Yeah, I agree. Look, he's been hurt, so that's helped like the data.
Played among shitty spacing too.
Yeah, like the sample data hurts him just because he hasn't played a lot of games, and so you're just like, what am I looking at here? But I agree, Cade is number one for me. I actually have Duren second because to your point about the bullshit, it's like you need to clean it up, and you need to also know if he's your guy in the middle, if he is your starting center of the future for the next couple of years. I think in his rookie season, I was high on him being that. After the second year, I'm unsure. And so if he can reestablish himself as that, now it changes the picture for them. I got Asar and Ron sort of tied for that third spot. Whichever one of those guys pops on the offensive end will likely be their starting wing of the future. I don't know which one of them will be that guy. Would likely say Ron makes more sense as an offensive guy. He showed more offensive versatility in the G League Ignite, although he's not a shooter whatsoever. Yeah, we'll see on that front. And then Ivy and Sasser. I'm lower on Sasser just because of the size aspect. I don't know if that's going to be a thing long term. Maybe he defies that aspect of it. Like the size just doesn't matter for a guy like him who can create space incredibly with that step back. But yeah, that's probably where I rank them all. Maybe I'm too low on Ivy. Do you think I'm too low?
No, actually, he's dead last in my ranking for it.
So there you go. Okay, yeah.
I haven't seen enough even the hints of the shooting. I guess like the playmaking, like you've seen it there. Maybe part of it was just the situation he's been in, but I have him. Then Sasser would be second to last. At the top, I went Cade, Ron Holland, Asar Thompson, then Duren, and then I have Sasser and then Jaden Ivey. So it didn't differ too much. I have a bad taste in my mouth from Duren last season. I don't really. Again,
I agree. Yeah, I need him to have a bounce back year because their center situation is muddy, and I don't understand it really either. I think JB Bickerstaff will help with that though. It's like establishing the tone, and like you said, maybe having a little bit shorter of a rope.
Vibe meter for them. What do you have for that?
You'll be surprised. 6 out of 10. I like Cade a lot, and I think I think Trajan Langdon, the way that they're going to try to build this team around Cade, the shooting, I'm not too low on the Tobias Harris signing. I think adding Tim Hardaway Jr. and Beasley is again shooting. I think Fontecchio was a good guy for them. Yeah, I think their signings were good this summer. I think they're betting on upside with a guy like Ron Holland. I don't think everybody in this core is there to stay long-term. I think that's why they brought in a new president of basketball operations. I think this 1 year, this next season that we see from them is this vibe check in general. So we'll see. 6 out of 10.
I'm going to go with a 6 out of 10 as well, because I like the direction, but just there's still the lingering uncertainty of, well, a bunch of these young guys aren't Trajan Langdon's guys. Now, most of them aren't. And then just Tom Gores is still sitting up here, and I don't know, like, whatever. He was the one that really was in the bag for Monty Williams. So 6 out of 10 for both of us. I know you have to go. So there are 3 teams left. I'm going to give you the dealer's choice here. Do you want to talk about the Hornets, the Bulls, or the Nets before I let you go?
Let's talk about the damn Chicago Bulls, man. I'll just forward.
Are they rebuilding? Do they even belong in this exercise? What's going on?
I don't know. Okay, this, for what it's worth, is my lowest vibes meter check. I have them at 2 out of 10. By
the way, they get a 0 out of 10.
Okay, there you go. I appreciate it because I was very, very close to giving them like a 0 or a 1 out of 10. I was
like, go to the negatives. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, exactly. The only reason that I gave them a 2 is because of Kobe White. I was like, oh, I like Kobe White.
That's
hopefully,
fair. And Io, I love Io.
And Io, but also it's like you brought in Giddey now, and so how does that work in terms of developmental reps for Io and for Kobe, and what that means for them if Giddey's going to have the ball in his hands a lot? What does that mean for some of the other players? What is Zach LaVine still doing on the roster? What is Nikola Vucevic doing on the roster? How can you reconcile the fact that between those two, DeMar and Caruso, you've pretty much gotten nothing in return for them. It's a disaster situation. Like, out of all these teams, we can look at it and say, hey, they at least are trying to work towards something. I do not know what that something is for the Chicago Bulls. I have no idea. That it's about as directionless and chicken with the head cut off type of situation as you can find in the NBA. I don't know. It's confusing. That's what the Chicago Bulls are, and that's why they get the lowest vibe meter check.
Yeah, they're confounding. And look, the Patrick Williams bet, that's fine, but it comes back to what you said. Where are they going, and what is I mean, the idea of signing Jalen Smith, all right, so it seems like they really want the ball in Josh Giddey's hands because they want some spacing. They still don't have enough of it. I like Mattis Buzelis, and that's like, well, he was drafted by the Bulls, so he's probably going to suck. Yeah. And like, well, that's really discouraging. And just the big thing is, even if you like some of the stuff that's in place and you think, well, if we just get out of Zach LaVine or don't play him, whatever, okay, fine. You have mismanaged all of your assets and even your developmental plays going back to Patrick Williams on offense, I would argue. Why should you trust this organization to get it right now with what you turned Alex Caruso and DeMar DeRozan into? And you were at a point, you mismanaged yourself so poorly that in the DeMar DeRozan sign and trade, the team that got the best singular asset in that deal was the Spurs in that swap, the 2031 swap from Sacramento, and not including DeRozan. So you got nothing for you didn't turn that into any opportunity. And then Alex Caruso is, even if you like Giddey, how do you not get a pick? Oklahoma City has 1 trillion picks and you got none of them. Yeah. And you got a guy who, even if you like, well, hey, we have to turn around and pay him now, either before he sets foot on the court with an extension or after the season, in which case, if you have to pay him, he probably had a good year. It's going to cost you more. So 0 out of 10 for me. I don't even know. The nice things I could say is Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu exist, and I love them, and I hope the Bulls trade them to teams that deserve them. That's where I'm at.
It's funny you say that about Mattis Buzelis because it's likely that he will eventually leave the Bulls and then be a very good player somehow, some way. Like, that's just how it works with the Bulls.
I compared him to a potentially better shooting version of Pascal Siakam, by the way. So I was very high on him before the draft. I apologize to him now. I have no faith that his career is going to pan out as long as he's in Chicago.
It sucks, man. Because this is, glorified franchise, Bulls, Jordan, all that type of stuff.
Are they glorified? They had Jordan. That's what this franchise is.
Yeah, it really is. I don't know, man. I guess the one thing I'll mention on the Bulls front that has me curious is they don't own their pick next year. It's top 10 protected to, I believe, San Antonio. Will they be that? I don't know. What is LaVine and Vooch do? I guess that's the part where I'm confused.
Well, the one encouraging thing is it does feel like they are undergoing a rebuild, even if it feels aimless still, right?
Yeah.
Or do you actually think, no, they might keep Vooch and LaVine and they're going to bring Lonzo back if his knees aren't made of jello, and they might just stumble their way back to 31 wins or something stupid.
My issue with Chicago is anytime it feels like they're going to do something correctly, they end up doing the complete opposite of that. So I don't know if me and you were saying, hey, at least they have some sort of direction towards a rebuild. I wouldn't be surprised if midway through the season they trade Josh Giddey and 2 first-round picks for whoever. I don't know. They are so mismanaged that I wouldn't be surprised at this point. Have you seen that video of never let them know your next move? And it's someone who eats a ham sandwich, then punches themselves in the face. It's just it's weird, right? That is the Chicago Bulls. They don't know what they're doing. It doesn't make any sense, man.
I'm going to upgrade them to a 0.5 out of 10 because we were able to put them in this discussion, which we couldn't have done this time last year.
You're right.
Yes. I kept you a few minutes past your time. Thank you so much for staying. Are you able just to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the fantastic content that you continue to create?
Yeah. You know what? I'll go quick on the Nets and Hornets because I don't want to leave those people behind. Okay.
The Hornets just got here. You can't be mad.
The Nets just got here. Incredible return on Bridges. Just please don't try to accelerate your timeline and go and sign another superstar. Just build organically.
No County 40 minutes a game, please.
Yeah, just relax, please. Just take a couple seasons and relax for a little bit, Brooklyn. Hornets, can't believe you signed Miles Bridges. Terrible person. That's incredible. Just why? But at the same time, we'll see what happens with the rest of the group. I actually agree with you on Brandon Miller. That would be very interesting to see if they end up kind of shifting gears towards prioritizing him more than LaMelo Ball, but that's neither here nor there. I kind of appreciate the way that they're building now. We'll see. How do you feel about that?
I agree with you. I actually wouldn't trade LaMelo. I love the fit between him and Brandon Miller.
Okay,
With you on
cool.
Miles Bridges, but I hope they don't keep him long term. It seems like the league has moved on, which I think is wrong. But like, what were they supposed? Like, if the league has moved on, you're not. The NBA isn't an arbiter of morality. Like, they can't be your standard bearer for morality. So I don't actually think he's a great player. I think he's become overrated, and I think he's overpaid now at that price point.
Yeah,
but
I agree. I agree.
The Hornets have better vibes than they did this time last year, though. So,
yeah, I also think they have a better direction in terms of their front office and just management in terms of what they're.
Everything that I like. Even I was like, does Mitch Kupchak, like, he had a good trade deadline if he was still calling the shots at that point. So I think the Hornets are set up pretty well. And the Nets obviously probably gave Houston a little bit too much, but like, to control your own picks the next 2 years, you've now created this 2-year window to find the guy and be as bad as you want to try and find the guy to build around.
Who do you think out of all these teams, who do you think is going to be the worst next year? Brooklyn? Is Brooklyn going to be the worst out of all of these teams?
I feel like Portland or Washington could find a way to get there.
It's true.
Maybe Detroit. Yeah, I think Brooklyn, like, they're gonna try to be bad. And I would guess, like, I think we're both in agreement. Like, probably Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Johnson both get moved by the deadline, would be my guess. And it wouldn't shock me if they move Nick Claxton on that deal if there's a
eventually. Yeah, I agree with you. I think I'm pro, like, I'm higher on the Nets situation just because, like, at least they're starting with some sort of foundation. And unlike the Bulls, they've cashed in at the right time to be able to go out and just start fresh, start anew. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Can you now tell our listeners?
Okay. All right. Now we'll plug away. At Just S Barahini, follow me on Twitter. Do some writing for Forbes on the Raptors side of things. Some video stuff for Raptors Republic, and then video stuff for Bleacher Report. But yeah, thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate you, man.